this two timeline journey where there are those who remain in the old 3D hardcore matrix patterns that are so afraid of anything else. They're so afraid of the light. They hold on to that and they use all means possible. And that is creating a field.
Friends, the US dollar has lost 85% of its value since the 70s when a dollar decoupled from gold, and the government seems bent on continuing the tradition. From now until after the next elections, the government can print as much money as they want. The last time they did that, inflation went up 9%. This means one thing: the security of your future and your family's future is all in your hands. Make sure you freeze the value of the wealth you're holding. Invest in gold with Noble Gold Investments. Gold is the one asset that has proven to withstand recession, inflation, and just about all economic threats. Noble Gold Investments is here to help you if you want to invest in gold. You also get a 24-karat quarter-ounce gold standard coin for free. Go to noblegoldinvestments.com now. noblegoldinvestments.com, or simply call 1-877-646-5347, the only gold company I trust.
Hey, Inspire Tribe, my fellow freedom lovers, how's it going? Welcome to some Coffee and Truth. I've done a lot of soul searching over the last 24, 48 hours. I mean, it's kind of what I always do. As you said, we've switched location for a little bit here. Hey, Montana. The thing is, Christine and I haven't even considered this time around to not bring the mobile studios so we can continue doing what we do. We just believe it's not a time to step away. I'll be honest with you, we have been energetically challenged for a little bit over the last few months just because of the amount of stuff that we've been doing. But at the same time, we've also experienced some of the most beautiful things in 2023 since I can think. So there's a thin line in everything these days, and that's kind of what I want to talk about. If you look at the world news today, I just wrote down a few things that are I went through the list. You know, we have various channels and sources that we can go through that are trusted. So no matter where you look at the Russia situation where Belarus is mobilizing forces on a border. Their defense minister has said the West is preparing for an all-out war. You go and look at what China's Xi Jinping has done, which is unprecedented. Just replaced senior leadership for the Rocket Force. That's China's military force in charge of almost all nuclear warheads. This is what you usually do before you go to war. You want to make sure that there's no comfort, there's no security in those who are receiving your orders. You want to make sure that they will fulfill those orders. We have Tottori in Japan, which issued an evacuation for 180,000 people because of the extreme rainfall and flooding of the region. Also unprecedented. In Turkey, the temperatures are rising above 122, which they've never seen before, or 50 Celsius if you're in Celsius. Extreme fires in France. Of course, we've seen Hawaii, which is a shit show from beginning to end. So many weird things happening. And of course, you have a fake president, the puppet in chief that's sitting in somewhere. I don't know if he's in a White House or a fake White House set. Who knows? But he said no comment after one tweet on the Hawaiian situation. So what I'm trying to say, I'm trying to paint a picture because I'm going to go into some of what I think is the solution energy and what I think we're walking through right now. And I was reminded over the last few days, you know, I grew up, I have plenty of passions. I was always in sports and in arts, music, if you will. But in the sports arena, I was all about fast, flying, jumping. It had to be adrenaline filled. And so, you know, I was always on that thin line. So I was an alpine skier, professional alpine skier, and my disciplines were downhill super G, so the fast ones. And in those disciplines, you are riding that thin line. If you're on the limit or even a little beyond the limit, you're riding that thin line between death and glory. Because in alpine skiing, I don't know how much you know about it, but we wear a extremely thin suit. It's just, you know, not even a millimeter. It's very, very thin. There's aside from the head and a back protector, there's no protection for the body whatsoever. Everything is just aimed at aerodynamics, and you're doing speeds of 70, 80, 90 miles an hour. So, and it's icy and steep. But the thing is, that thin line that leads to victory and glory, if you're in the sports metaphors, you know, if you want to win, that thin line is within an inch of absolute mastery and destruction. Because sometimes less than an inch, sometimes you're within a few millimeters where you either go and you have the best run of your life, or you crash horribly. I noticed the same thing. I used to race dirt bikes growing up as a kid. So I used to notice the same thing. That winning line, that winning jump, whatever it is, it's the same thing. When you go to the limit or beyond, you're riding that thin line. How does that relate to our situation on Earth today? Well, I remember growing up, my dad, when I was a boy, my dad would, he would tell me how World War III was going to come. And he didn't paint like any horrific pictures. He just said, everything is always a cycle. He said, economies are built up and things are built up, and then there is a saturation. Then you need to destroy everything in order to build it up again. And this is what he says has been done over and over and over again in history, right? So I looked at things very differently from the beginning. And yes, part of me was always looking out for these signs. Okay, how is it that we have moved more and more from perceived harmony? It was not real harmony, but let's just say we had a certain stability. You always had the crises, right, that were pushed through, whether that was oil or ozone layer or global warming or whatever the crisis of the day was, the Cold War. But in that, there was still a certain stability for a lot of people in the world. And now we've moved away from stability completely, which just, if I'm just analytical, and if I don't invest my creative power, if I just analyze what I'm seeing, we're clearly moving towards absolute all-out war. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But because I am a creative being, I don't accept that. I don't accept the inevitability of anything, actually, other than the inevitability of the human spirit prevailing and winning. That's the only inevitability that I really subscribe to. But we're also walking this thin line. Why? What has happened over the last years? Before COVID, you had not in a political arena, but you had a real spiritual revolution in a lot of places in the world. A lot of people were beginning to explore their own creative power. And because there was no pandemic and there was no engineered climate disasters and stuff like that, it was tense, don't get me wrong, but people still had enough space to really focus on their inner development. And that was very, very dangerous to the status quo. Very, very dangerous to the analytical big tech powers. That's the last thing they want, real, honest spirituality. So when COVID happened, the main purpose was to inject fear, because that fear is the basis for all the reactions that would follow. The fear that would react to people complying, and that compliance that would allow these forces to push through whatever they wanted. The death and the control grid and digital everything. And another thing that this would produce, and this is where we're now walking this thin line. When people today look at all these disasters, the floods, the fires, the explosions, but let's stick to those that are at least perceived to be natural, right? If you have a flood, heavy rainfall, huge storms, tornadoes, typhoons, whatever it is, a lot of people would jump to the conclusion that it's all artificially produced. In some ways, it is, because they've been messing with it for so long, and we've been messing with it for so long. But the earth is also a living organism and part of our organism. We're one huge, deeply connected organism. So the earth naturally reacts to whatever the human emotions are, whatever the dominant human emotions are. So to see some of these things that are unfolding on Earth today is not surprising, following years of extreme worry, panic, and fear in a lot of people. That emotional power, that envisioning of horror that they had because it was pushed onto them through the TVs, right? Where they would see, remember in the beginning of COVID where they showed Italy with all these coffins and God knows what. So these images produce a deep fear in people that are not connected, that don't have that, they're just followers, just reactors. And this is why I always say that that's when the mind is being taken over, because this imaginative power that these people then use for something dark, it then begins to manifest in reality. That's the game, really, right? You also see that there has been a huge increase, of course, over the last years in the entertainment industry for series and shows and movies that have that dark element very present, way more than ever. I mean, over the last years, the horror movies and all that increased incredibly. Overall, the average has moved so far into the violent and dark realm. And that too, because when people watch a show and when they're invested and when they're really there present, the human spirit does not distinguish between what you're watching and the emotions that you're feeling because you're watching something fictional, or what you're imagining, or whether it's really happening in your life. And depending on how much you're invested, you produce these emotional images, right? And that really affects the field. We're not even aware of, just imagine the amount of symbolism that we have and the amount of visuals and audible things that we have in our reality as compared to maybe just a few hundred years ago, where if people lived in their homestead or village, there was very little. Of course, when people went to church, there was a lot. You go into any Catholic church, it's basically a museum for symbols, right? Everywhere they are. And the symbols represent something completely different than what people are told, but symbols have power. And so these symbols and these visual images and these messages are being put into people every day and have been. And the more people consume that, especially on an unconscious level, the more they produce these negative emotions and energies that then are put into the field. So I can't say that it's just HAARP and it's just weather manipulation. They're manipulating the human spirit to the point where the human spirit is abused to produce these things. And this is a kind of occult knowledge that these forces hold. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because my thought is always, how do we solve this problem? Because it's a problem. So many people are unaware of this. So the journey of making people aware of all these things, it's coming to an end, I think. I don't think we have much time left to do that, especially with completely newly awakened. I think we can help those if they seek that, at least on the periphery. What's really happening, I don't think there's much you can do, but I'm speaking to those who are aware, but are using their imaginative and creative powers, sometimes subconsciously, for the enemy. In that, we need to strike a certain balance. I believe that we need to use our creative powers, our thoughts, our feelings, our imagination for that beautiful, wonderful outcome that we want to see in the world. I don't believe that anything is more important than that. The vision for that future. Even if you are in a symbolical or even real battlefield, that has to take precedent. And I think that's very difficult. Don't get me wrong. I think it's very difficult. The more pressure you experience in your life, or the more pressure the world puts on you, the more shit that happens, the harder that gets naturally. So you need to have tactics in place and ways to remove yourself from the noise for a period of time, and really discipline to do that. Discipline to turn off the screen, even though your attention is required and your help is required. And you could now, I mean, there's so much shit going on in the world. You could be a billionaire and, you wouldn't be able to send $100 to each cause right now because there's so many. And I just don't think that is the main purpose right now for us in this tribe and family. Yes, of course, we'll help where we can, but we would spread ourselves so thin. So the one thing is that, which I frequently talk about, these spiritual practices, these daily rituals that you can use throughout the day, the breath work, the short meditations, the long meditations, the prayers, that are so important to anchor your spirit and keep it at a certain vibration and frequency. So that's one of the really important things. But then there's also the striking balance. I want to bring some of the most enlightened people into the mix here, which are the Tibetan monks. If you understand the true Aryan history, for example, and how the different ethnicities and races really connect, and where some of the most enlightened movements have originated from. But if you look at Tibet, modern day Tibet, the last 100 years or less, Tibet was a highly spiritual enlightened place because of the traditions that have been passed on and the monks that lived there with their practices. And nonetheless, these monks have been butchered and killed and persecuted by certain forces, mainly through the instrument of the Chinese government. And a lot of many atrocities have happened. And I do believe that there is a maybe that's my ignorance, but I believe that these monks and these movements have forgotten about a certain balance, about the balance of where do you draw the line and defend yourself and defend what you stand for. And there's spiritual defense and there's physical defense, and ideally these work together. That's the balance we need to strike. We need to become finally a complete being again. It is not natural for a human being, a mother or father, for example, to see their child in danger or even attacked and not use force or power, whatever you want to call it, to remove that danger. If you have other abilities to remove that danger, by all means. If you have any other means to do that because you don't want to use physical force, well, if you can, do it. And there are highly developed beings but they will still use some sort of force. They will then use psychic force, or they will use energetic force to eliminate the danger and maybe just paralyze it, whatever. I mean, you can do that. You can create an energetic field around you. That all is possible, but all of it has the same result: to defend you and what you hold dear, and to make sure that that danger does not negatively affect you and those who you hold dear and near. This has been beaten out of us over the last 100 years, especially in the Western world. America is one of those few places that kind of upholds this, mainly through the almost religious cult around the Second Amendment, but it had to become that, or it would have been done away with already. It had to have, it had to be this huge cult-like holding on to it. And today, many of my most spiritual friends around the world that live in places that haven't had guns since they can remember say, I'm not a gun person, but please don't give up your guns in America. There is a certain point in line where you just have to make that decision. I could never watch. I just couldn't. This is just me. I could never watch my family, my children be violated, attacked, or anything without, if I have to giving my life to defend them. That's just in me, right? I'll do anything to protect them from that danger. I don't care. I made that choice long ago. I don't want to. I don't ever want to. But if I have to, I'll kill someone. If that in a line of defense happens, it happens. I can live with that. Absolutely. I don't want to, but I will. But I think we have not thought about these things in a very long time because we haven't been confronted with the kinds of dangers. Now we are at an all-out war situation. And if we could expand the meaning of war just a little bit, the most primitive, if you will, the most primitive kind of war is where you just use tanks and guns and, back in the day, swords and bombs, and you absolutely make it clear, I am the aggressor, you are the victim, and we're using weapons to kill you. That's kind of the old school approach to war that had many different meanings. One was the destruction, but the other one was also the symbolical show of force and making it clear who's in charge and who isn't. Today, for the most part, they're moving away from that kind of warfare against the general population. They've moved to the sophisticated kind of warfare where you don't see the enemy. The enemy seems to be a force of nature or something that's out of control, beyond control of anything. And so the population believes they're constantly at odds with something that is coincidental and beyond anyone's control. That's sophisticated warfare. You talk about the horrors of climate change for so long that this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in many ways. And all these other things, you're right, where there's mayhem and destruction and death, but there is no one to point to, and there is no one to look at. And in many ways, it is also symbolic for the times that we live in, because ultimately, we have to point at ourselves, either from being complicit or for being complacent, right? For not standing our ground earlier, because that in and of itself, if you allow something to happen continually, it makes you complacent and complicit in the long run. So we're at this thin line, because on the other hand, which I love to talk about, on the other hand, I see miracle after miracle. What kind of miracles am I talking about? Well, one of the main miracles that I see is that people today who are becoming sick, let's say maybe as a result of or of their lifestyle, physically sick, that have been deeply programmed into the matrix for the longest time. These people now, as they become sick, have sort of like the spontaneous awakening where they go into alternative healing, where they go into emotional healing, where they go into trauma healing, something they would have never considered before. So it's almost like spontaneous awakening, which then leads to healing oftentimes, maybe not always, but oftentimes. And this is one of the beautiful things that I see. The other miracles that I'm seeing is that apparently God is now bringing people together. And this is what we're personally experiencing. For the first time in our lives, the amount of synchronicities is, let me put it this way, there's way more synchronistic encounters and us being brought together with people we've known for lifetimes than just what appears to be random interactions with people. The random is, of course, not random, but it's less meaningful. Some interactions feel less meaningful than others. But those meaningful interactions and connections are becoming more and more and more, and they're becoming faster. They're instantaneous. So you don't have to go through this, let's get to know each other and build that trust. It's like, you know each other. We remember, we have a spiritual signature kind of exchange, and that happens. The beautiful thing is that equation, on that side of the equation, things are moving, and they're moving regardless of what is happening on the other side of the equation, which is so important. And that's that thin line. The thin line is the equal sign, if you will, between the two sides of this equation. And right now it seems like the pendulum could go either way, right? It could swing really hard this way, really hard that way. Eventually, the pendulum will have to be in a balance, right? That's where everything needs to be. And I also believe that if you balance within yourself the light and the darkness, shadow, light, whatever you want to call it, I don't think in this world we will ever lose all duality. I don't think this world was designed to be this. I think if we harmonize it within ourselves, it isn't a problem anymore. That's how I see it anyways. So as I've been saying, our main task is to remain high-spirited through death and mayhem. And this is something that, let me also rewind just a little bit. There were 15, 20 years ago, Christine and I were going through this phase where we really realized with our thinking mind and through reading books and having encounters and experiences, we realized that there was a split happening. It was happening slowly, more subtle back then, way more subtle than now. But the split was between those who were starting to awaken and those who were, it would seem, starting to sleep even deeper. And in that phase, we asked ourselves, how will we move into the next stage of this earth? You know, people call it 4D or 5D, and I never really cared for these terms. For me personally, it just never comes to mind. But how do we level up, if you will, if there are so many people who are leveling down currently? And it was said to us from various sources, but mainly it was coming through as a message, was these people will just fall away. It's like, and the intrinsic feeling that I always got, which was so weird, is it will just be like, you know, when you wake up and people will not be in your life anymore, but it's not like you consciously remember, they're just gone. And I always wondered, how would that happen? Like, what would be the process? And now we're seeing this. We're literally going through it. We have been. It's where people fall away from our experience, and we just know on a level it's thinning, but we don't really remember quite consciously who these people were or why they're not around anymore. Of course, we see a lot of people dying way more than ever before all over the place because of this thinning, because of this depopulation agenda, and here's where it gets so blurred, right? Because there is this spiritual thinning and there is the depopulation agenda, and you almost think it's working hand in hand. And in some ways it is, and in others it isn't. We're going through this thinning because spirits and souls are on different journeys, right? Where if the numbers are true, which they could be completely off, but let's just take the number of 8 billion people on Earth, or 9, I don't know. Even if it's 5, who cares? The principle stands. Let's say that there's 8 billion people on Earth. That's 8 billion journeys. Some are very similar, on their development journey, and some are completely like off the charts apart. So these people these spirits cannot end up in the same place at the same time, naturally. But there is a tendency where those who are similarly developed, if you will, are moving at a similar pace in a similar direction. That creates an energy that manifests in the field. And this is what we're seeing, that this is literally this two timeline journey, where there are those who remain in the old 3D hardcore matrix patterns that are so afraid of anything else. They're so afraid of the light. They hold on to that and they use all means possible. And that is creating a field. And then there are those who are moving forward and awakening more and igniting their spirit more. And that is creating a field. And those are the opposing fields that are fighting with each other, in which one will take dominance, right? This is, in a spiritual way, how I can explain this, at least. We're walking this thin line every day now. And we knew that in order for people to be removed from this physical realm, there would have to be something that would happen. You know, they just don't disappear in thin air. There's things that happen, natural disasters, comets. I don't know if comets exist, but let's say they do, or something like that. There could be wars, there could be famine, there could be any number of things. And now we're seeing those things, of course, happen, which cause for that thinning, right? They cause that thinning. And this is where we're in. And we always knew that when we were going to go through this phase, it would be very difficult to remain in a place of higher consciousness, and to remain not just hopeful, but more than that, creative. That's really the challenge. Remain creative. Remain a positive co-creator in the face of all of this that is so destructive to the human spirit, to see others suffer, to see the destruction of beautiful places. I mean, just yesterday, I looked through pictures of Lahaina in Maui, on Maui. Just a charming little town. I have such a soft spot in my heart for these organic, authentic little towns with, you know, and I don't even know if it was that really. I just know that that's what I saw. The small, like local owned shops and the spirit of the people that live there having built this. And it could have been different. You might have been there and see it differently. That's just what I saw from these pictures. A beautiful, authentic, charming spirit. And it's just soul crushing to think that these evil psychopaths just pushed a few buttons and just destroyed the whole thing. But even in that, I have to find that balance again and not give in to this darkness. It's like when you go and research the atrocities that are being done to our children, and the awareness is important. But if you remain there in that dark place, and if you let your spirit be dragged down, you cannot be of help, because then all you feel is either helplessness or vengeance. You just want to kill everything and everyone that's doing that. And none of these things is powerful or can intrinsically transform anything. So this is where we're at. There's one force that is very organized, that knows only one way. This force can only operate in the lower realm of terror, fear, worry, doubt, pain. That's where this force operates. And it will do anything it can to keep people there. That's what this force does. If you can elevate yourself beyond this frequency realm, you're good. You're good. And you continue to walk the path. If you can't, that's where the trouble begins. And this is what we need to remind ourselves every day. That's why we'll continue to talk about this, because when the clarity is there, you can make that choice. And I can only tell you, if you sit down today for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 minutes and do conscious breath work, deep breathing. And with every breath, you just imagine pulling that breath up. And as you go up in that breath, you just imagine, I'm breathing into a higher frequency. That's all. And you just do that. So you just keep breathing up. And you do this 3, 4 times a day. Now, let's say that would cost you 30 minutes a day. Where can you take away 30 minutes from anything else and do that? I promise you, you will lift your spirits Every time you do deep breath work, the oxygen comes through your body. Everything is being activated. You get this natural dopamine high. All the good, positive, beautiful, helpful hormones are kicking in, and you're just doing something. And it's so simple. Shallow breathing. We've been also introduced to shallow breathing by certain programs. So deep breathing, highly important. Anything that helps you do that. And I would always encourage you to not look for outside sources to do that. We offer guided meditations. We do guided meditations, but I don't think it should be something you become addicted to, because when the guide is gone, then your ability to do that is gone. Go within and produce that from within. You have everything you need. If you need help, take it, but don't rely on it. That's what I'm trying to say. All right, I think the message kind of is complete and through here. I opt out of the doomsday scenarios. But the doomsday scenario for me is only one, is when it's not that destruction. There will be more destruction on Earth, unfortunately. There is a momentum. But the doomsday scenario for me is when you and I and a much larger group of people today loses that connection that we've worked on for the last years and decades. That's the doomsday scenario. It's not the other people going in the wrong direction. They have been going there, and I don't even expect that to change. It's all of us losing that connection because we're caught up in the daily grind of these horrific events. This is the doomsday scenario. It's really up to us. If you take that responsibility for your own life, and if you accept that, it won't be a burden, it will be a blessing. All right, my friends. We love you very, very much. We take you with us everywhere we go. I mean, that should say something. There's a deep appreciation for this journey that we're on. And for those who have signed up, by the way, for the Yado retreat, we can't wait to see you in October. It's so funny when people walk into the room at Yado, which is a beautiful room on the ocean. It's a clubhouse, small, but beautiful. And when they walk in, it's almost always the same interaction with their eyes. It's like they look into my eyes, Christine's eyes, and then they look down. It's kind of like, oh, they do have legs. We never see their legs. Yes, we do have legs. And you'll get to see them at Yado, dear friends, if you are part of this year's tribe. We're so looking forward. We go so deep there. It's such a beautiful journey. And aside from an open Q&A on Sunday, where people can ask pretty much anything, we don't focus on any world external events. We don't discuss these things there. We really go deep into the creative power, into connecting with higher self and the creator, and overcoming any and all boundaries. That's really where we go. We leave the world where it is for those 4 days. We don't go into world events. People are encouraged not to use social media. It's really about creating a field. So just so you know, it's October 5th through 8th. If that speaks to you, that kind of experience, check the link in the description. See if it's the right time for you. We'd love to have you. Much love to you all. Many blessings. We love you so much, and we'll be back with you very, very soon. Would you like to get access to exclusive content as well as being part of a community of like-minded people posting, sharing, and connecting on a deeper level? Come join the Inspired community on Locals, where we share more intimately and privately and do our Coffee and Truth live streams, as well as our Honey Talks show, the only inspired show with Christine Nolan. The Inspired community is absolutely uncensored and unfiltered, a place for truth, authenticity, and freedom. Join us now at inspired.locals.com or click on a link in the video description.